It all started on a chilly December morning, when the streets of London glistened under a faint dusting of frost, and the iconic Westminster Abbey seemed more majestic than ever. Crowds had gathered, not just for tradition, but because this year, something felt different. Something was missing, something that no one expected. The annual Christmas carol service, a hallmark of royal tradition, a moment where generations of royals and citizens alike come together in harmony, suddenly had an unsettling silence, a void where princess and should have been. You might be thinking, surely she's just busy. But there's more beneath the surface than a simple schedule conflict. Something about this absence whispered of intrigue, tension, and perhaps even scandal, and it would shake the royal family in ways that would leave the public speechless. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. The question on everyone's lips that day wasn't just, "Where is Princess?" and it was, "Why now? Why at a time when tradition matters most?" In the palace corridors, whispers rippled like a shadow across marble floors. Courtiers, aides, and even longtime royal staff began to murmur among themselves. "She's unwell," one would say, only to be met with a shake of the head by another. "No, it's more complicated than that." Every explanation seemed to open another mystery. And right at the center of this storm, as the media frenzy began to brew, was Kate Middleton, Duchess of Cambridge, whose expression that morning revealed a tension few had ever seen. Her poised demeanor, so often a symbol of calm and grace, now held a subtle, almost imperceptible crack, a hint that she had something to reveal, something that no one had anticipated. Kate had long been admired for her composure, her elegance, and her ability to navigate the labyrinthine world of royal protocol with what seemed like effortless ease. But this day, the air around her seemed charged with a different energy, urgency, anxiety, even frustration. She was about to break a silence that no one realized needed breaking, revealing layers of truth that would leave observers stunned. And yet, as she prepared to speak, the question lingered. How much could she say? How much could the public truly handle? The answers would slowly unravel over the next hour, but the first hints were already setting the stage for a narrative more gripping than any palace drama the world had witnessed. Imagine the scene. Westminster Abbey, resplendent with its centuries-old architecture, echoing with the harmonious voices of choirs, the soft glint of candlelight illuminating intricate carvings, and the air thick with the scent of pine and incense. Everything was perfect, almost too perfect. And yet, in the midst of this pageantry, a single absence loomed larger than life. Princess, and often the quiet anchor in royal ceremonies, was nowhere to be found. The crowd noticed. The cameras noticed. And behind the gilded doors, Kate noticed, more acutely than anyone else. What could have caused this unprecedented absence? Theories were already forming, some plausible, others downright sensational. But as we peel back the layers, you'll discover that the truth was stranger, more emotional, and far more complex than anyone could have imagined. Consider this. Royal families, for all their tradition and public scrutiny, are often portrayed as untouchable, nearly mythical in their stoicism. Yet beneath the layers of protocol and perfection, they are human. They experience fear, doubt, frustration, and sorrow just like anyone else. And sometimes, those human moments manifest in ways that the public rarely witnesses. Princess Anne's absence was not just a missing appearance. It was a signal that something extraordinary, something deeply personal, was happening behind the closed doors of Buckingham Palace. But what could it be? Was it illness? A family dispute? A matter of personal principle? Or was it something else entirely? Something that even the most seasoned royal commentators couldn't predict? These questions are what will drive our story forward, because the answers are not immediately obvious. And as we delve deeper, you will see how this single event, a missed Christmas carol service, acts as a thread that unravels a tapestry of secrets, tension, and revelations that stretch across the entire royal family. In fact, the more you look, the more contradictions appear. Kate herself had always been a stabilizing force, a bridge between tradition and modernity, yet her role this day hinted at a more complex narrative. She seemed caught between loyalty to the institution and concern for a family member, caught between what was expected of her and what she knew to be true. Observers noted fleeting expressions, subtle gestures, and nuanced body language that spoke volumes, even when her words were measured. Every smile, every nod, every pause was loaded with meaning, and it became increasingly clear that this was not just about a missed service. This was about a family in the midst of turbulence, about duties colliding with private struggles, and about the delicate balance of appearances and reality that the royal family must maintain every single day. Let's pause for a moment and consider the stakes. The Christmas Carol service is not merely a public event. It is symbolic. It represents continuity, duty, and unity, the very principles on which the monarchy rests. When someone like Princess Anne, a steadfast figure known for her dedication and resilience, is suddenly absent, it sends ripples far beyond the walls of the abbey. It provokes speculation, invites scrutiny, and most importantly, opens a window into a side of royal life that the public rarely sees. For Kate Middleton, breaking her silence was not just a choice, it was a necessity. And the words she would eventually speak promised to reveal truths that had been carefully concealed for decades, truths that could reshape public perception and perhaps even alter the course of royal dynamics. But here's the thing about secrets. They rarely stay hidden for long. Once a thread is pulled, the unraveling can be swift and dramatic. And as we will discover, this single thread, the absence of Princess Anne, connects to events, decisions, and hidden struggles that the palace had hoped would remain private. There are whispers of tension among family members, subtle power dynamics, and unspoken concerns about health and duty. There are stories that no media outlet has fully captured, and reactions that defy the typical narrative of royal decorum. In short, the seemingly simple question of, why did Princess Anne miss the Christmas Carol service, is actually the entry point into a web of intrigue, emotion, and revelation that few could anticipate. Now, here's where it gets even more compelling. Kate's eventual statement, the moment when she broke the silence, was not just a matter of reporting facts. It was a calculated revelation, layered with empathy, authority, and just enough mystery to keep the public riveted. She hinted at challenges, she acknowledged concern, and yet she withheld enough detail to ignite speculation. And as the cameras captured every expression, every pause, the audience was left wondering, what is really happening behind the palace walls? What truths will come to light in the coming days? And perhaps most importantly, how will this impact the perception of a royal family that prides itself on resilience and continuity? By now, you're probably asking yourself, what exactly is going on with Princess Anne? How serious is this situation? And why is Kate Middleton the one to break her silence? These are questions that cannot be answered with a simple statement. They require context, history, and insight, all of which we will explore in the chapters to come. You will meet the figures involved, understand their motivations, witness the emotional tensions, and discover the surprising facts that only a few insiders truly know. And through it all, you will feel the weight of expectation, the complexity of duty, and the vulnerability that even the most public figures cannot escape. So, buckle up, because the story we are about to unfold is anything but ordinary. It is a tale of absence and presence, of silence and revelation, of public duty colliding with private struggle. And while the abbey may have looked serene that morning, behind the walls, a storm was quietly brewing. A storm that would ultimately demand attention, confrontation, and clarity. Kate Middleton's decision to speak, Princess Anne's absence, and the unseen dynamics within the royal family form the first layer of a story that is as human as it is regal, as intimate as it is public, and as shocking as it is inevitable. And just when you think you have a handle on the situation, just when the pieces seem to fall into place, the narrative shifts, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Hidden truths begin to surface. Unexpected alliances and tensions come to light. And what seemed like a single incident, a missed Christmas Carol service, becomes the spark for a series of revelations that will challenge perceptions, emotions, and expectations in ways that no one, not even the most seasoned royal observer, could have predicted. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It began before dawn, when London was still wrapped in the quiet hush of early winter. Street lamps flickered against frost-coated pavements, and the distant sound of the River Thames moving under its bridges seemed to echo the tension that had begun to ripple through the royal household. Few people noticed at first, and fewer still could sense that this particular morning would mark the start of something unusual, something that would ripple far beyond the abbey's ancient walls. And yet, within the palace, the air was charged. Courtiers whispered, aides shuffled hurriedly, and every movement seemed heavier than usual. You might be wondering, why would the absence of a single royal matter so much? Princess Anne has long been considered steadfast, dependable, even unshakable in her public duties. Her record of attendance and devotion is nearly unmatched. She is, by all accounts, the person who keeps traditions alive even when others falter. And yet, that morning, her absence was palpable. It was a presence in itself, a gap that the most seasoned observers could not ignore. If someone as committed and resilient as Anne could miss the Christmas carol service, then the implications were enormous. What could cause her to step back on a day that had been marked in her calendar for years? Kate Middleton, meanwhile, was already at Westminster Abbey, arriving in her signature composed manner, her demeanor poised yet slightly tense. Onlookers noted subtle differences in her expressions, tiny lines of concern that betrayed her calm exterior. She moved with deliberate precision, every step measured, yet every gesture seemed to convey awareness of the extraordinary circumstances. Something was weighing heavily on her, something she could not ignore. What was it? The cameras, the journalists, the expectant crowd, they would all soon find out, but only after careful preparation. Kate was about to step into a story that no one could have predicted, a story that would combine public tradition with private reality in ways that defied expectation. Meanwhile, the abbey itself stood as a silent witness. Its Gothic spires pierced the sky, its stone walls resonating with centuries of history and ceremony. Inside, preparations were meticulous. Choirs rehearsed the traditional carols, their voices echoing with both reverence and practice-driven precision. Staff arranged candles and floral displays, ensuring that every detail matched the grandeur expected by the public and the royal family alike. And yet, amid all this preparation, there was one missing figure whose presence would have anchored the ceremony, whose absence sent subtle ripples through the intricate choreography of the event. Princess Anne was not there, and the question of why she wasn't would begin to dominate both public speculation and behind-the-scenes conversations. So let's pause for a moment and consider the implications. In a family where appearances are carefully curated, a single deviation, a missed engagement, a late arrival, a cryptic expression can signal volumes. It can provoke speculation, rumors, and even concern. What was happening behind the closed doors of Buckingham Palace? Was this absence the result of illness, of disagreement, or of some personal struggle that had been kept private for too long? The layers of possibility were almost endless, and each one carried its own emotional weight. By mid-morning, the story had begun to leak into the press, though carefully worded and circumspect. Headlines hinted at absence without making definitive claims. Royal family faces unusual circumstance at Christmas service, one read. Another noted, Princess and Mrs. Traditional Carol event. Palace remained silent. Observers were left to connect the dots, some assuming illness, others imagining conflict, and some simply acknowledging that even the royals are human and subject to unexpected circumstances. But within the palace, the truth was far more nuanced and far more emotionally charged. Kate Middleton's own response, though subtle, was revealing. To the casual observer, she seemed composed, even serene. But those trained to read royal body language, staff, insiders, and longtime photographers, noted the tension beneath her calm exterior. A slight tightening of her jaw, a deliberate pause before greeting members of the congregation, a careful avoidance of certain eye contacts. These small signals suggested that Kate was aware of more than what the public had been told. She carried knowledge, perhaps even concern, that would soon surface in ways that would capture the attention of millions. And then there were the courtiers. In the hours leading up to the service, whispers grew into murmurs, and murmurs into low-level panic. The palace has a rhythm, a carefully maintained schedule, and deviations, especially by someone as prominent as Princess, and create cascading effects. Seating arrangements had to be reconsidered, ceremonial roles shifted, and protocols adjusted on the fly. For staff who had been trained for years to maintain absolute discretion, the sudden changes were a challenge, a test of their ability to adapt without causing public alarm. And yet, despite all the careful orchestration, the absence of Princess and was like a shadow that could not be concealed. But here's the emotional beat that often gets lost. Behind all the logistics, there is humanity. Kate, like all family members, faced an inner conflict. Public duty demanded grace and composure. Private concern demanded empathy and care. And in that tension, every glance, every step, every breath carried weight. Observers watching from the gallery may have seen only calm efficiency, but the reality was far more complex. Kate was navigating a delicate balance, preparing to break her silence while respecting boundaries, traditions, and the dignity of the family, all while the world watched. By the time the service began, the audience was seated, the choir's harmonies filled the air, and the candles flickered softly in the high windows. Yet beneath the surface, anticipation grew. Those who knew the story understood that this would not be a normal service. Something had shifted, and everyone present sensed it, even if they could not yet articulate why. The camera crews captured every detail, every pause, every subtle exchange, because they knew that a real story, layered and revealing, was unfolding in real time. The tension was almost unbearable. Questions lingered like suspended notes in a carol. Why is Princess absent? How does Kate plan to address this? What unseen circumstances have led to this extraordinary moment? And most importantly, what would happen next? The audience, both present and watching around the world, felt the pull of curiosity, the anticipation of revelation, and the unspoken drama that always accompanies deviation from the expected. But as the service reached its midpoint, an unexpected development occurred. A subtle signal, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable to those attuned to the family's inner workings. A message had been delivered, a word whispered, a glance exchanged, small in appearance but monumental in consequence. For Kate, it was confirmation of the gravity of the situation, a sign that what had begun as a minor anomaly was in fact part of a much larger story. And as she prepared to take her place, poised to address the congregation and the cameras alike, the stakes could not have been higher. So, as the choir's voices soared and the abbey's walls reverberated with centuries of tradition, one thing became clear. This was not merely a missed attendance or a scheduling issue. It was the beginning of a story, a revelation that would unfold over days, weeks, and months. And for Kate Middleton, the moment to speak, to reveal, and to navigate the intricate web of family, tradition, and public expectation had arrived. But what she would reveal first, the words that would both shock and captivate, was only the beginning. The deeper truths, the hidden struggles, and the intricate family dynamics would come next, and no one could have predicted the ripple effects that would follow. And as the abbey bells tolled, signaling the start of the service, the stage was set for events that would leave the public and the royal family forever changed. But what Kate would reveal to the world first would only hint at the deeper secrets that lay beneath, secrets that, once uncovered, would change everything. It's easy to look at royal life from the outside and imagine perfection. Gleaming palaces, glittering ceremonies, and flawless appearances. But reality, the human reality, is rarely so tidy. Behind the velvet curtains and polished floors, pressures simmer, decisions weigh heavily, and every choice carries consequences that ripple far beyond the palace walls. Princess Anne's absence from the Christmas carol service was not just a missed duty. It was a symptom of a deeper struggle, one that had been quietly intensifying behind the scenes for months. And on that December morning, the tension that had been quietly building reached a point that no one could ignore. You may wonder, what kind of struggle could keep someone like Princess Anne away from an event she has never missed? We're not talking about ordinary obstacles here. We're talking about a combination of health concerns, emotional exhaustion, and the subtle pressures that come from being a member of a family whose every move is scrutinized by millions. The palace, for all its grandeur, operates like a pressure cooker. Expectations are high. mistakes are magnified. And when someone is steadfast as and begins to falter, the ramifications extend beyond her personal life into the fabric of the monarchy itself. Inside Buckingham Palace that morning, staff moved with a quiet urgency. They whispered in corridors lined with tapestries, adjusted schedules, and double-checked every detail. Every aide, every secretary knew something was off. They had noticed Anne's fatigue in previous weeks, the subtle hesitation in her step, the quiet moments when she seemed to withdraw from conversations. Those who had worked closely with her understood that this was not normal. And, after all, was known for her reliability and her resilience. And yet, here she was, absent on a day when absence could not go unnoticed. Kate Middleton, ever the observer, had noticed these signs long before the public did. Her awareness extended beyond protocol. She had an innate sense of family dynamics, of the unspoken pressures that accompany life in the royal spotlight. She had witnessed the small moments, Anne's fleeting expressions of worry, the sighs caught behind closed doors, the subtle pauses in conversation that hinted at a mind weighed down by responsibility. These were not mere trifles. They were indicators that something significant was unfolding. And Kate, as the poised and perceptive figure she is, understood the importance of addressing this situation with both discretion and clarity. The palace operates on layers of communication, some formal, some whispered, some carefully concealed. And within those layers, the truth of Anne's situation had begun to emerge. Certain staff members had been tasked with monitoring her well-being, ensuring she had the support needed to continue her duties, and alerting key figures when intervention was necessary. For weeks, these measures had been in place, quietly, behind the scenes. And now, as the Christmas carol service approached, it became painfully clear that these precautions had not fully mitigated the underlying issue. Consider the emotional stakes. For Anne, every public appearance carries a weight that few outside the family can fully comprehend. The scrutiny of the press, the expectations of tradition, the responsibility toward family and duty. All of these combine to create an environment where even the smallest misstep can feel catastrophic. And when personal health or emotional strain enters the equation, the pressure intensifies exponentially. Choosing to step back, even for a single event, is not merely a practical decision. It is an emotional and psychological reckoning. Anne's absence, then, was both a symptom and a statement, a silent acknowledgement that something had shifted in ways that could no longer be ignored. Meanwhile, Kate's role in this unfolding story was complex. On one hand, she had her own obligations, her own duties to perform, and a public persona to maintain. On the other, she had an intimate awareness of the struggles facing her family, an understanding of the delicate balance between public perception and private reality. That morning, every movement Kate made, every greeting, every glance carried subtle meaning. She was performing, yes, but she was also communicating, signaling reassurance, concern, and solidarity to those who could read between the lines. Her poised exterior masked an acute awareness that this moment was both fragile and pivotal. Now, let's consider the media angle. In an age where every royal movement is documented, photographed, and analyzed, absence becomes more than absence. It becomes a story. Journalists are trained to detect deviations, to speculate, and to frame narratives that capture public attention. And in this case, the absence of Princess Anne was a magnet for speculation. Headlines hinted at health concerns, whispers of tension, and subtle hints of family dynamics. Each report, while careful to avoid outright claims, added to the pressure, amplifying the emotional stakes for those within the palace. Every story in print or on television became another layer in an already complex situation, influencing both perception and reality. Yet, despite all this attention, the full truth remained obscured. Anne's personal struggle was not something that could be distilled into a soundbite or headline. It was intricate, nuanced, and deeply human. The layers of duty, expectation, and personal well-being intertwined in ways that defied simple explanation. For those who understood the family's inner workings, the significance of her absence was immediately clear. For the public, it remained a tantalizing mystery, one that ignited curiosity and speculation. And for Kate, The challenge was to navigate this complexity with both sensitivity and transparency, to reveal enough to satisfy concern without compromising privacy or dignity. The tension built further as the service began. Choirs sang, hymns filled the vaulted ceilings, and the congregation followed centuries-old traditions. And yet, a subtle undercurrent of unease flowed through the air. Staff and family members exchanged knowing glances, whispered words passed from ear to ear, and every gesture seemed laden with unspoken meaning. Kate, at the center of it all, moved with deliberate grace, aware that every action could be interpreted, every expression scrutinized, every word amplified. And she knew that the moment to break the silence, to speak with measured clarity about a situation, was approaching. Consider, for a moment, the emotional tension in Kate's mind. She is, after all, not merely a public figure, but a family member deeply invested in the well-being of her relatives. She feels the weight of expectation from the public, the scrutiny of the press, and the responsibility to maintain the dignity of the monarchy. And she is acutely aware that her words carry consequences, not only for the immediate situation, but for the broader perception of the family. How much to reveal? How much to withhold? Which details will inform and reassure, and which could ignite panic or misunderstanding? These are questions that few outside the palace could truly comprehend, yet they define the very human struggle that underlies every royal appearance. And then, amid the hymns and ceremonial routines, a signal arrived. A subtle message, a discreet note, a whispered word, enough to confirm that the situation was more serious than anyone had initially thought. Kate's posture stiffened imperceptibly, her expression registering a quiet determination. She understood that the narrative would soon need to shift from speculation to acknowledgement, from rumor to measured revelation. The emotional stakes had shifted, and the story was about to enter a new, more dramatic phase. But here's where the cliffhanger lies. What Kate would reveal, and when she would reveal it, was still uncertain. The service proceeded, each note of the choir, each flicker of candlelight, adding to the anticipation. Observers both inside and outside the abbey could sense the tension, the subtle shifts in energy, and the brewing drama that extended far beyond the ceremonial walls. And while the public saw order, tradition, and elegance, behind the scenes, emotions were raw, stakes were high, and the story of Princess Anne's absence was far from complete. Because what came next would not just explain her absence. It would expose hidden dynamics, reveal untold pressures, and hint at struggles that had remained private for too long. And as Kate prepared to address these realities, she faced a moment that would define not only the mourning, but the unfolding narrative of the family for weeks to come. But just as the service reached its midpoint, an unexpected twist emerged. One that would challenge assumptions, shift loyalties, and force everyone involved to reconsider everything they thought they knew. And no one, not even the most seasoned royal insiders, could have predicted what happened next. The palace has always been a world of whispers. Not the kind that drift harmlessly in the air, but the kind that carry weight, meaning, and consequence. Every corridor, every tapestry-lined hallway, seems to hum with stories. Some trivial, some monumental, all unspoken yet understood. On the morning of the Christmas carol service, those whispers were louder than usual. And at the center of them all was the absence of Princess Anne, a missing figure whose influence and presence were impossible to ignore. You might ask yourself, why do whispers matter so much? In a palace where protocol is law, words carry subtle power. A whisper can hint at illness, suggest tension, or even foreshadow decisions that may change the course of family dynamics. And on this morning, those whispers were more than just idle chatter. They were signals, coded, deliberate, and filled with anticipation. Courtiers and staff, seasoned in the unspoken language of the royal household, exchanged glances that conveyed concern, curiosity, and sometimes alarm. And at the center of it all, Kate Middleton listened, observed, and weighed every subtle signal, understanding that this was a moment that demanded both attention and discretion. Let's step inside for a moment. Imagine walking through those corridors yourself. The marble floors echo with your footsteps, the walls lined with centuries of history, paintings of kings and queens staring down as if silently judging. Servants move quietly, carrying messages, adjusting preparations, checking schedules. Every movement, every sound, has a purpose. And in that carefully orchestrated rhythm, even the smallest deviation, like the absence of princess and resonates loudly. It creates tension. It invites speculation. And it sets the stage for the emotional and dramatic unfolding that was about to take place. Kate, moving through these same halls, was acutely aware of the undercurrents. She had long learned to read the palace as a living organism, to interpret the subtle signs of unease or disruption. A servant's hesitant step, a brief glance between aides, a shift in the tone of conversation, each was a piece of a larger puzzle. And that morning, all the pieces seemed to point toward a single, undeniable truth. Something had shifted within the family, and the ramifications were about to reach far beyond the walls of Westminster Abbey. Now, consider the emotional complexity of this situation. Kate is not just a bystander. She is part of the family, intertwined in its dynamics, invested in its reputation, and aware of the personal struggles that others may conceal. She understands the delicate balance between maintaining public composure and acknowledging private realities. And in this moment, she is navigating that balance with precision, knowing that the eyes of the world are watching and that every misstep could be amplified, interpreted, and judged. The whispers themselves were revealing. Some suggested illness, subtle references to fatigue, or hints of a personal struggle that had been quietly ongoing. Others hinted at interpersonal tension, delicate disagreements that had never been aired publicly. Each theory, each suggestion, added layers of complexity, contributing to an atmosphere thick with curiosity, concern, and anticipation. And while no official statement had yet been made, the energy in the palace corridors was undeniable. Everyone knew that the situation was extraordinary, and everyone understood that the story was far from over. It is worth pausing here to consider the psychology of the palace staff. These individuals have spent years learning discretion, observing hierarchy, and mastering the art of subtlety. Yet, even for them, this morning presented a challenge. How do you prepare for an event when a key figure is absent unexpectedly? How do you maintain order, tradition, and dignity while managing personal concerns that may be hidden from public view? And how do you navigate the complex emotional terrain of a family whose every move is scrutinized, every reaction dissected, and every word analyzed? These questions formed the invisible backdrop to a morning that appeared, on the surface, calm and ceremonial, but underneath was anything but ordinary. Meanwhile, Kate's internal monologue was racing. She thought of Anne, of her dedication, of the unseen pressures that had been accumulating for months. She considered the optics of the situation. What the public would see, what the media might speculate, and how the story could evolve in unpredictable ways. And she contemplated the delicate timing of any statement she might make, knowing that the balance between transparency and discretion was razor-thin. Every decision she made in that moment could alter the course of perception, trust, and understanding, both inside and outside the palace. The emotional weight of such moments cannot be overstated. Kate was operating in a world where the personal and the public collided constantly. A single glance, a single misstep, or a poorly timed word could ignite speculation and scandal. Yet, she was not merely reacting. She was strategizing, assessing, and preparing to act with the precision and care that such a situation demanded. And as the minutes ticked by and the service drew closer to its peak, the tension became almost tangible, hanging in the air like the faint scent of candle wax and pine from the abbey itself. As the service began, whispers continued to circulate. Some staff members subtly shifted seating arrangements, ensuring that the absence of princess and would not be glaringly obvious. Others coordinated discreet signals to Kate, providing updates and guidance without attracting attention. And throughout it all, the human emotions at play, concern, anxiety, empathy, responsibility, interwove with the formal rituals of the ceremony. Every step, every nod, every careful gesture was both performance and authentic response, a delicate dance of public duty and private feeling. Consider the audience, too. Those watching from afar could see the elegance, the tradition, and the pageantry, but they could not sense the full spectrum of emotion and tension behind the scenes. They could not hear the subtle whispers, interpret the glances, or feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on Kate and the other family members. And that gap between perception and reality is precisely what created a story so compelling, so human, and so gripping. By mid-service, Kate had already begun the mental preparation for the moment she would speak, the moment she would offer acknowledgement without overstepping boundaries, insight without revealing too much, and reassurance without disclosing private struggles. It was a tightrope walk, balancing empathy, authority, and diplomacy in a world that demanded perfection. And yet, she was ready. Or at least, as ready as one could be in a situation so unprecedented, so charged with expectation, and so layered with complexity. But even as Kate positioned herself to address the subtle turbulence of the morning, an unexpected complication arose. A minor miscommunication, a fleeting concern from a staff member, a hint that something deeper than anyone had anticipated was influencing the day's events. It was small, almost imperceptible, yet it carried enormous significance. The calm facade of the ceremony began to crack ever so slightly, revealing the fragility that lay beneath the surface. And here's where the suspense truly begins. The situation was no longer just about an absence. It was about underlying struggles, family dynamics, and emotional pressures that had been quietly building for months, perhaps years. It was about choices, difficult, nuanced, and deeply human, that would shape not only the day but the unfolding narrative of the royal family. Every observer, every staff member, every family member now found themselves on the edge of revelation, waiting for the next signal, the next word, the next subtle shift that would illuminate the hidden story behind Princess Anne's absence. And just when it seemed that the morning might proceed without further incident, a subtle but unmistakable signal arrived. A whisper, a glance, a note, confirming that the events about to unfold were far more significant than anyone had realized. Kate understood immediately. The moment of revelation was approaching, and when it came, it would send shockwaves through both the public and the palace. But what exactly would be revealed, and how far the consequences would reach, remained uncertain. What had been hidden for months was now inching closer to the surface, and no one could predict how the story would evolve. The next moment, the next decision, the next word would change everything. The abbey was silent for a heartbeat. Not the calm silence of reverence, but the suspended silence of anticipation. Every eye, every whisper, every subtle movement seemed magnified. Kate Middleton, poised and graceful as ever, felt the weight of that silence pressing down on her. It was a pressure unlike any other, the pressure of public scrutiny, private concern, and the delicate balancing act of royal expectation. In that instant, one thought ran through her mind. Everything depends on how this next moment unfolds. You might wonder, why would a single moment feel so critical? The answer lies in the convergence of duty, family, and emotion. Princess Anne's absence had already sent ripples through the palace, through the media, and through the public consciousness. The staff, the courtiers, and even the visiting dignitaries could sense the tension. And Kate knew that her next steps would either calm the storm or escalate it. Every gesture, every word, every glance mattered. More than anyone outside the walls of the abbey could possibly understand. The choir's voices rose in a harmonious crescendo, filling the high ceilings with sound, masking some of the tension while amplifying it in other, more subtle ways. Candles flickered, reflecting off gilded frames and polished marble, their light casting both clarity and shadows across the vast space. Kate's eyes swept the room, observing faces familiar and unfamiliar. Her mind raced, considering every possible reaction, every unintended consequence. She was aware that what she was about to do would be analyzed, dissected, and remembered by staff, by family, and by millions watching from around the world. Behind the scenes, whispers continued to circulate. Some staff members speculated about Anne's health, others about internal family dynamics, and still others wondered if there was a wider story that no one had yet grasped. Kate, listening attentively, absorbed these whispers without reacting outwardly. Every word, every glance, every hint of emotion was data to be processed, and she knew that when she finally spoke, she had to strike a balance. Enough information to address concern, but not so much as to inflame speculation or compromise privacy. The tension escalated as Kate moved to her position at the front of the abbey. She was a figure of calm authority, yet beneath that exterior, her thoughts were racing. What could she say without giving away too much? How could she reassure the public while honoring the privacy of a family member? And perhaps most importantly, how could she convey empathy without appearing vulnerable herself? These questions were complex, layered, and urgent, and as she prepared to speak, the abbey itself seemed to hold its breath. Imagine the emotional weight of this moment. The public sees only a poised, confident duchess, delivering words with clarity and elegance. But behind that poise lies a storm of consideration, reflection, and sometimes fear. Kate was not simply performing a ceremonial role. She was navigating a human drama, balancing compassion with duty, and preparing to reveal a truth that had been carefully guarded. Every syllable mattered. Every pause mattered. Every glance mattered. And in that silent tension, the stakes felt almost unbearable. And then, as she began to address the congregation, the first words emerged. Not loud, not dramatic, but carefully measured. She acknowledged Anne's absence, offered reassurance, and spoke to the importance of family, duty, and tradition. The tone was gentle, empathetic, yet firm, the kind of voice that both comforts and commands attention. Observers noted subtle cues, a brief nod to staff, a glance at the choir, a pause that allowed the words to settle before continuing. It was clear that every movement was deliberate, every word intentional, every expression a part of the message she sought to convey. Even with the measured speech, the tension did not fully dissipate. The whispers, the glances, and the subtle energy in the abbey hinted that there was more beneath the surface. Kate's words addressed the immediate concern, but they also suggested that this absence was part of a larger, ongoing narrative, one that involved challenges, emotions, and decisions that extended beyond the service itself. And as the congregation absorbed her words, the collective awareness of something extraordinary began to grow. People sensed that what they were witnessing was not merely ceremonial, but deeply human, a moment where the weight of family, duty, and personal struggle intersected in ways that few could fully grasp. Consider for a moment the psychology at play. Kate was simultaneously performing for the public, communicating with family, and managing internal emotional responses. Her awareness of every subtle signal, a frown, a sigh, a lingering glance, allowed her to adjust, respond, and guide the moment in real time. This level of presence is rare, even among experienced leaders, and it underscores the complexity of life in the royal spotlight. The ability to maintain composure while acknowledging vulnerability is a skill few outside the palace walls could truly appreciate. But the real tension lay in what was not said. Kate's words, though measured, carried nuance. They acknowledged absence without specifying cause, conveyed concern without divulging details, and reassured without revealing the full depth of the struggle. This intentional ambiguity created a layer of suspense, a curiosity gap that would keep observers both in the abbey and across the globe wondering what had truly transpired. And as any storyteller knows, suspense is a powerful tool. It draws attention, heightens emotion, and prepares the audience for revelations yet to come. By now, the service had reached a crucial point. Choirs sang, candles flickered, and the congregation participated in familiar rituals. And yet, beneath the surface, the drama continued to unfold. Kate's acknowledgement of Anne's absence was only the first step in a larger, more intricate narrative. Questions loomed. How serious was Anne's situation? What had led to this absence? And what impact would it have on family dynamics in the days and weeks ahead? Every observer, whether in the abbey or watching from afar, was left with these questions, questions that demanded answers, yet whose answers remained tantalizingly out of reach. Then, in the quiet moments between hymns, another subtle development occurred. A whispered message from a staff member, a discreet glance exchanged, a signal that something unexpected was about to emerge. Kate registered the moment immediately, understanding that the story was about to shift once again. That the carefully managed tension was about to give way to revelation, and that the audience would witness the next chapter of this unfolding drama. And here's where the cliffhanger comes in. While the initial acknowledgement addressed the surface-level concerns, it hinted at deeper layers, hidden struggles, and unspoken tensions that would soon surface. The story was no longer just about a missed Christmas carol service. It was about the intricate interplay of duty, emotion, and family relationships. And what came next, the deeper revelation, the unexpected twist, the private truth made public, would transform the narrative entirely, leaving the audience both stunned and captivated. Because in the world of the royal family, nothing is ever simple. Every absence, every word, every gesture carries weight. And when the layers of tradition, expectation, and personal struggle converge, the result is a story that is as human as it is dramatic, as revealing as it is shocking, and as unpredictable as it is compelling. But what Kate would reveal next, the private struggles, the hidden pressures, the truths long kept behind palace walls, would change everything. And no one in that abbey, nor millions watching worldwide, would see it coming. While the world outside Westminster Abbey marveled at the ceremony, few realized that behind every smile, every nod, and every carefully rehearsed gesture, there was an invisible strain. Royal life, often imagined as glamorous and effortless, carries pressures that few can comprehend. And for Princess Anne, that strain had reached a level that could no longer be contained. Her absence from the Christmas carol service was not just a single missed event. It was the culmination of months, perhaps years, of hidden challenges, personal sacrifices, and relentless duty. You might ask, what kind of pressures could drive someone as steadfast as Princess and to step back? Consider the relentless schedule of a royal. Public appearances, charitable work, state obligations, family duties, all meticulously documented, all scrutinized by the media, and all subject to intense public expectation. And then, add the weight of private struggles, health concerns, and the quiet emotional toll of constant observation. For someone like Anne, who has spent decades balancing service and family, even a small deviation from routine can feel monumental. Kate Middleton, standing poised yet alert, understood this more clearly than most. She had observed the subtle signs. Moments of fatigue hidden behind a smile, a slight hesitation in movement, fleeting expressions of concern that were quickly masked. She had witnessed how and carried the weight of tradition with grace, often at the expense of personal comfort or ease. And in that moment, Kate recognized that the Abbey's service was not just an event. It was a stage where emotion, duty, and vulnerability collided in ways that demanded both tact and empathy. The palace staff, too, were acutely aware of the tension. Their roles, often invisible to the public, are crucial in maintaining order and ensuring that tradition proceeds without disruption. They noticed the quiet signals, the whispered consultations, the discreet adjustments made in real time to accommodate Anne's absence. Seating arrangements shifted subtly, ceremonial roles were recalibrated, and communication lines buzzed quietly with updates. Every action was a response to unseen challenges, every gesture a solution to problems that few outside the palace could perceive. And then there was the psychological impact. Being part of a family constantly in the public means that personal struggles are never entirely private. Every decision, every absence, and every expression is interpreted, analyzed, and sometimes misrepresented. For Anne, stepping back from a single ceremonial duty was more than a personal choice. It was a public signal, one that could ignite speculation, concern, and even criticism. Kate understood that navigating this reality required a careful blend of compassion, diplomacy, and strategic communication. The emotional weight of such situations is immense. Kate was balancing multiple roles at once: the supportive family member, the public figure, and the steward of perception. She had to consider not only how Anne's absence would be interpreted in the moment, but also the long-term impact on public trust, media narratives, and the broader perception of the family's stability. Every glance she exchanged, every nod she gave, every carefully chosen word became a calculated part of the narrative. Yet, the human element could not be contained by protocol alone. Anne's struggle was deeply personal, intertwined with decades of duty, loyalty, and unspoken challenges. The absence that morning was a manifestation of exhaustion, emotional strain, and perhaps even private health considerations, all carefully hidden from the public eye. Kate's role, in turn, became one of mediator and interpreter, translating concern into action, observation into reassurance, and private reality into a message the public could understand without compromising dignity. Consider for a moment the emotional dynamics among the family. Tension, unspoken yet palpable, hovered like a mist over the abbey. Relationships, histories, and responsibilities intertwined in complex patterns, shaping the decisions of each individual. Kate's awareness of these patterns allowed her to navigate the day with poise, yet every step carried risk. One misstep could escalate speculation, one poorly timed word could inflame concern, and one misplaced gesture could compromise both personal and public perception. Meanwhile, the audience, both inside the abbey and around the world, remained largely unaware of the full extent of the story. They saw elegance, tradition, and ceremonial precision. But the underlying human drama, fatigue, concern, emotion, and anticipation, went largely unnoticed. That gap between perception and reality created a tension all its own, drawing observers into a story they sensed was extraordinary, even if they could not fully articulate why. As the service continued, Kate's focus never wavered. She observed, listened, and absorbed every nuance, from the subtle cues of staff members to the reactions of the congregation. She understood that every detail mattered: the pacing of the ceremony, the positioning of participants, and the timing of acknowledgments all carried meaning. And she also recognized that the story of Anne's absence was not just about a single day. It was part of a larger narrative of resilience, duty, and vulnerability. A narrative that would continue to unfold in the days and weeks to come. The strain was not limited to the day itself. Anne's absence hinted at longer-term challenges: the cumulative effect of decades of service, the delicate balance of personal health and public expectation, and the emotional burden of living life in constant observation. Kate, attuned to these realities, approached her role with a blend of empathy and pragmatism, understanding that addressing one aspect of the situation was only the first step in a much larger journey. And then, in the quiet moments between hymns, a subtle signal arrived, a reminder that the situation was more intricate than anyone outside the palace could comprehend. Perhaps it was a whispered note from a staff member, a discreet glance exchanged between aides, or a fleeting expression captured on camera. Whatever it was, Kate registered it immediately. The hidden pressures that had been building for months were now at the surface, demanding attention, careful management, and strategic action. Now comes the most compelling part. The public acknowledgement of absence is only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it lies a web of personal struggle, familial dynamics, and emotional complexity. Kate's response to this web, measured, compassionate, and strategic, would set the tone for how the story unfolded. Her ability to navigate this intricate landscape underscores the humanity behind the pageantry, the vulnerability behind the public facade, and the profound challenges of life within the royal family. But just when it seemed that the situation was stabilizing, an unexpected twist arrived. Something subtle, almost imperceptible, yet impossible to ignore. A new layer of tension revealed itself, one that promised to deepen the narrative, intensify the stakes, and force both family members and the public to confront realities they had not anticipated. And as the service drew to a close, one fact became clear: Princess Anne's absence was not an isolated incident. It was a signal, a harbinger of hidden struggles, private challenges, and emotional dynamics that would soon demand attention, understanding, and revelation. The story was far from over, and the next moments would reveal truths that no one could have foreseen. Because behind every ceremonial smile, behind every carefully timed gesture, there are layers of reality waiting to be uncovered, and what came next would expose them in ways that would shock, move, and captivate the world. The public sees only what the cameras capture: polished smiles, perfect posture, and ceremonies executed with seemingly effortless precision. But behind closed doors, within the private corridors of the palace, life is far more complicated, far more human, and far more vulnerable. Princess Anne's absence from the Christmas Carol service was only the visible tip of a much larger reality. A family grappling with pressures, unspoken struggles, and the emotional weight of expectation. And in that private world, Kate Middleton was not merely an observer. She was a participant, a mediator, and increasingly, the voice of reason. You might wonder, what happens when a family accustomed to public scrutiny faces private challenges? In such households, normal emotions, fear, concern, exhaustion, and frustration are amplified, intensified by the weight of legacy, tradition, and the relentless gaze of the media. Every decision, no matter how small, carries implications far beyond the immediate moment. A missed event, a delayed conversation, or a hesitant word can ripple outward, influencing perception, relationships, and even the delicate machinery of ceremonial life. And Princess Anne, despite her strength and resilience, was confronting exactly this kind of amplified challenge. Kate, positioned within this environment, had a unique perspective. She understood both the public and private dimensions of the royal family's life, allowing her to navigate complexities with sensitivity and intelligence. She observed interactions between staff, aides, and family members with careful attention, noting subtle shifts in tone, expression, and posture. These observations were not casual, they were crucial. In a family where appearances matter, understanding the unspoken signals can mean the difference between resolving tension and allowing it to escalate. Let's step into one of those private moments. Imagine a corridor lined with portraits of past monarchs and ancestral artifacts, silent witnesses to centuries of decision-making and familial tension. Staff move quietly, some carrying documents, others conveying messages, all aware that discretion is paramount. In a room off the main corridor, Kate meets with senior aides, discussing the morning's events, sharing insights, and coordinating messaging. The conversation is hushed, deliberate, and precise. Every word is considered, every decision weighed, because even the smallest misstep could have consequences that echo far beyond the immediate context. Meanwhile, the emotional toll on Anne was mounting. Despite her reputation for stoicism, her body and mind were signaling that the pressures of duty had become unsustainable. Fatigue, stress, and perhaps underlying health concerns had all converged, creating a situation in which attending the Christmas carol service was no longer feasible. It was not merely a question of obligation. It was a matter of well-being, a recognition that even the most dedicated individuals must honor their limits. And yet, acknowledging this reality in a family and role defined by expectation and duty is no simple task. It requires courage, honesty, and the ability to navigate both personal needs and public perception. Kate's response to these dynamics was both subtle and strategic. She offered reassurance where it was needed, coordinated support for staff, and maintained an outward appearance of calm composure that served to stabilize the environment. Her actions reflected a deep understanding of both human psychology and the complex structure of the royal household. By observing, interpreting, and acting thoughtfully, she helped ensure that the unfolding situation remained manageable, even as the stakes and pressures continued to rise. The interplay between public and private perception is crucial here. From the outside, the absence of a single royal might seem minor, even trivial. But within the palace, the implications are profound. Every action, or lack thereof, is interpreted, analyzed, and often amplified. Kate understood that managing perception required a careful balance, providing enough information to satisfy curiosity and concern, without exposing private struggles or undermining family dignity. This balancing act is delicate, emotionally charged, and incredibly high stakes. Consider the staff, too. They are trained to manage not only protocol, but also human emotion. They observe, interpret, and act behind the scenes, often anticipating needs before they are expressed. On that morning, their attentiveness was critical. Small adjustments, from seating arrangements to the timing of ceremonial cues, ensured that the absence of Princess Anne did not disrupt the flow of the service. Every action was a response to the unspoken dynamics at play, and every gesture reflected both professionalism and empathy. And yet, the human element always complicates matters. Emotions are unpredictable, even in a highly structured environment. Kate had to navigate her own feelings of concern and empathy while also managing the expectations of staff, family members, and the public. This layered responsibility created a tension that was almost palpable, a quiet pressure that underscored every decision, every interaction, and every word spoken in those halls. Now, consider the emotional landscape of Anne's absence. For decades, she has maintained a reputation for strength, dedication, and consistency. Her presence is a stabilizing force, a symbol of reliability in an environment defined by tradition and ceremony. And yet, her absence introduced a subtle, almost imperceptible imbalance, one that those attuned to family dynamics could immediately detect. Kate recognized this imbalance and responded with the skill, empathy, and composure necessary to prevent it from escalating. But here's the human truth. Even the most capable and composed individuals have limits. Anne's absence was a reminder that behind every public role, behind every ceremonial expectation, there is a human being with vulnerabilities, needs, and emotional boundaries. And it was Kate's task, and her challenge, to honor those boundaries while maintaining the dignity, continuity, and public trust that the family depends upon. And then, as the day progressed, another layer of complexity emerged. A message, subtle yet significant, arrived from one of Anne's aides. It suggested that her absence was not merely a matter of immediate fatigue or logistical conflict, but the symptom of deeper concerns that had been quietly mounting for some time and that required careful management. Kate registered the significance immediately. The story was no longer about a single absence. It was about underlying challenges, private struggles, and the delicate navigation required to maintain both health and duty. The stakes were high. The palace, the public, and the family all depended on a careful handling of this delicate situation. Kate's role had evolved from observer to active participant, a mediator balancing empathy, discretion, and strategic communication. She understood that the unfolding narrative had ramifications beyond the present moment, potentially shaping public perception, media narratives, and family dynamics for months to come. And then, just as the day seemed to be settling, a subtle but unmistakable shift occurred. A whispered update, a discreet glance exchanged between aides, a minor but revealing change in tone. These small signals confirmed what Kate already suspected. The situation was more complex than anyone outside the palace could imagine. The human story behind Anne's absence was only beginning to surface, and the consequences would soon reach far beyond the immediate circle of family and staff.